5.5 are the properties of parallelograms, and then we'll get into more specifics in 5.6. First thing you need to know is that a parallelogram is a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides. So if you draw a parallelogram, okay, your first pair of parallel sides, they're across from each other. So we could say this is one pair, and remember we label parallel with those arrows, and then the second pair would be here. And they are not parallel to the first, so you need a different number of arrows marking that. Okay. There are several things that you need to know about parallelograms, and these are true for all parallelograms. Even when we get into specific parallelograms such as rhombus, rectangle, and square, these will still hold true. Okay, the first couple deal with the angles of parallelograms. Okay, and what you need to know are that the opposite angles, so the angles across from each other in a parallelogram, are congruent. Okay, so if this was 50, this would be 50. Doesn't matter what the size, the opposite angles in a parallelogram are congruent. And you could put a tick mark on there to show that they're congruent. Okay, that would be true for the other pair as well. So we could put 2 tick marks and 2 tick marks. Okay, now consecutive angles, remember consecutive means next to or in a row. Okay, so angles that are next to each other, like if I were counting around this parallelogram, this angle is next to this one. It's also next to this one. So these are consecutive. These are consecutive. Okay, so consecutive angles are supplementary. Now if you don't remember what supplementary is, you really need to start working on your vocab. We've been using that for several weeks now. That means that it adds to 180 degrees. Okay, for instance, if I were to tell you that this was a 50-degree angle, okay, we said this one would also be 50 because they're congruent. Okay, now these two would have to add to 180. Okay, or you could look at these two. These are also consecutive. So you would say 180 minus 150 and you would be left with 130. And these opposite angles would have to be congruent. Okay, and notice if you added all 4 up, they would total 360 because a quadrilateral has a total of 360 degrees for its sum of its interior angles. Okay, now as far as the sides of a parallelogram go, the sides across from each other, okay, well, obviously we said that they're parallel, okay, so we'll actually write that down as well. We'll put 2 blanks here. Okay, are parallel and, okay, there's another attribute that you need to know about these sides. They are going to be congruent. Okay, so this side will be the same length as this side. So they're parallel and congruent. Okay, so this side would be equal to this side. That's true for all parallelograms. Okay, these two consecutive sides are not necessarily congruent. Okay, the ones across from each other, the opposite ones, are congruent. Okay, now as diagonals go for parallelograms, we need to go ahead and draw the diagonals. I will typically draw the diagonals when we're doing problems and how you may see them on a test. If I draw it, will be as dotted lines. Okay, so here are my diagonals. Okay, remember a diagonal is the line segment connecting two non-consecutive vertices. Okay, so 2 corners that are not consecutive. The diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. Okay, and that means they cut each other in half. So bisect each other. Okay, so that means that this diagonal from the 50-degree angle to the 50-degree angle, okay, right here is the midpoint of it. So this is the midpoint of this segment. So you could say that this is congruent to this. Notice I put 3 tick marks because I've already used 1 and 2, and this isn't necessarily the same length as one of those sides. Okay, and this shorter diagonal, I say shorter because this is a closer distance than these are. Okay, so that's why we did not say they're congruent. They're not always going to be congruent. Okay, but they will always bisect each other. So you could put 4 tick marks on these to show that those are congruent. Alright, so let's try just a couple of practice problems using those attributes. Okay, in this you're told that these are parallelograms. So in this first parallelogram, you're given a 72-degree angle. Okay, well, the easiest one here to find is probably B, because the opposite angles are congruent. So B would be 72 degrees. Okay, now we know that consecutive angles should add to 180 degrees. And I've used 72 degrees, so I will subtract it, and that leaves me with 108 degrees for this angle. And 65 are here. What is left for C? So now you're going to subtract 65 from that 108, okay, and that's going to leave you with 43 degrees. So angle C right here is 43 degrees. Now A, it doesn't tell you which is which is the 43 and 65. You have to think back to your parallel lines. When we have parallel lines, we'll look at these two parallel lines, and the line that cuts through them, the transversal, this diagonal is serving as a transversal. Those alternate interior angles are congruent. So C would be here. Okay, so that means that A and 65 are the same. Okay, anytime that you can draw a Z, and I'll show you what I mean when I say Z, in a parallelogram, notice this is a Z, those angles are going to be the same. Okay, and it works for a backward Z or an upside down Z. It really doesn't matter. So if we could draw it for the A, this Z kind of on its side, okay, A is going to be congruent to 65. And this is always true when you're dealing with the sides and diagonals of a parallelogram. And that's just kind of a neat trick that'll help you solve some problems more quickly. So A is 65 degrees. Okay, now on this second parallelogram, you're given the lengths of a few of the segments, TR. Okay, so from T all the way to R, that's this diagonal, is 32. And we know that the diagonals bisect each other. So right here, U is the midpoint of TR. So if the entire length is 32, that means that we can split it evenly into 16 and 16. Okay, they tell us that QR, this side here, is 20, and that QS, this diagonal, is 44. Again, U is the midpoint, so if you divide that by 2, you get 22 and 22. They're asking for the perimeter of UTS. Okay, I'll outline UTS so that you can see UTS, triangle. So what is the perimeter of this triangle? Okay, perimeter means the distance around. So we have 16 and 22, but we need the third side. And if you remember your rules, pardon the bell. Okay, if you remember your rules about parallelograms, the opposite sides are not only parallel, but also congruent. So if QR is 20, TS is 20. So then you have to add your 3 sides of your triangle. So 20 and 22 is 42, 52, 58. So the perimeter is 58 centimeters.